It's time for your regular dose of sleepy time gaming facts, kids. So grab a pillow and pull up a bed. This time around, we've got a whole host of trivia for tons of Nintendo 64 games, including classics like Ocarina of Time, Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, and many more. So kick back and chill out. We're here now, and we're ready to get you nodding off faster than you can say The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Speaking of which, we're kicking things off with Ocarina of Time and some of the game's inspirations. It's unsurprising that the Zelda series as a whole has a rather medieval theme going on. So to get some inspiration for the houses of Hyrule Castle Town, Miyamoto took a trip over to Germany. Whilst in the land of the Deutsch, he took the time to visit several homes, constructed in half timber, located in Lower Franconia, as well as spending a few weeks over in northern Bavaria. The resemblance is pretty striking. Being the first attempt at translating Zelda into a 3D adventure, it's notable that Link is unable to jump on command, something that, looking back, seems quite natural for these early titles. But it should be noted that Link was able to jump with a button input in earlier 2D titles, such as Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, or by utilizing the Roc's Feather in Link's Awakening. Instead, Link jumps automatically when reaching the edge of a platform. The choice for automatic jumping has several conflicting stories as to where the idea came from, with statements having been made by series producer Eiji Aonuma and series co-creator Miyamoto. Who came up with the idea of automatic jumping is yet to be confirmed, with Aonuma claiming that the idea was directly inspired by the Roc's Feather, and that auto-jumping was decided on because of his own poor platformer playing abilities, with the desire for the game to simply do all of the jumping for him. Miyamoto, however, states that he'd thought of the auto-jump mechanic one morning and sprung it upon the development team, who at the time had been considering a manual jump button based on their previous work on Mario titles. Miyamoto hoped that it would be an intentional limitation that sparked the team's imaginations, something that might allow them to, quote, do all kinds of things. It wouldn't be until Breath of the Wild, nearly 20 years later, that manual jumping found its way into a 3D Zelda game. One of Link's obtainable pieces of equipment, the Goron tunic, actually has some hidden benefits that were never outright presented to the player. The intention of this tunic is that it protects Link from heat and reduces the damage he takes from lava. These same protections, however, also apply to acid and spikes, though whether this is intentional or not is up for debate. It may simply be the case because the game was coded so that acid and spikes utilize the same hit detection as lava, giving Link protective benefits through a simple oversight. One thing that was intended to appear but was removed in the final moments of the game's creation was the inclusion of chain chomps from the Mario series. In a 1999 interview, published in the Japanese strategy guide for Ocarina of Time and translated into English by Shmupulations, Miyamoto revealed that there were originally going to be chain chomps located throughout Gerudo's fortress. Miyamoto explained that the chain chomps would have been able to grab hold and capture Link while wrapping him up in their chain. He would have had to use the Megaton hammer to break them and free himself. These were still in the game up until the final revisions of the game's code, though Miyamoto refrained from explaining why it was decided to remove them. Death can be a rather heavy thing, but for Mario in his adventures on the N64, it can be more of a confusing affair. Super Mario 64 has a large number of glitches relating to Mario's death, such as when the player places a crate near a slope of a specific angle. Doing this and then performing a ground pound on the crate will cause instant death for Mario. Instant death can occur when not even touching an object, however, like when performing certain actions while located above quicksand. For some reason, the game will believe Mario is touching the quicksand and will sink into nothingness whilst mid-air. It isn't all terrible though, death can be avoided as well, albeit for just a few seconds. The game prioritizes the animation of the player walking through a door over the player being determined as dead, and so if Mario is able to lose all of his health while he is in front of a door, it's possible for him to walk through the door whilst he is technically dead. and have his death animation play only after he reaches the other side. This same effect occurs with the secret stage Wing Mario Over the Rainbow. While Mario will usually fall into the moat surrounding Peach's castle when dropping out of the stage, this transition does not reset his health at all. This means that, by chance, if the player manages to crash Mario into a ledge before he falls out of the stage, he will immediately drown once he reaches the water in the hub area. A similar effect occurs with the animation involving Mario landing in snow. In the Cool Cool Mountain stage, landing directly on the edge of the floating island near the stage's bridge will cause Mario to immediately warp to the bottom of the level's play area, typically causing a death. Because Mario is immune to dying when he's stuck in snow like this, he'll finish his animation before immediately dying. While not relating to Mario's death, there is also a bizarre issue that Nintendo seems to have with emulating Mario 64, which has been progressively getting worse with each different release they make. Over the years, Mario's shadow seems to be rising off of the ground more and more with each new release of the game, initially appearing on the ground before being partway up his feet, and now on Switch, with his shadow consuming the bottom half of his feet entirely. Not quite the same as dying, though perhaps an even worse fate for Mario can occur when collecting a star while positioned over an updraft. Because of the physics of the updraft, Mario will collect the star but continue to float in the wind indefinitely. Because control is taken away when obtaining a star, and the animation will only play when Mario hits the ground, he will be stuck in this position, only able to adjust the camera or, quite simply, reset the console. A similar softlock can occur if Mario manages to throw a Chuckya off a ledge, but then jumping after it and getting grabbed by it just on the same frame as the enemy exploding. Mario will be stuck flying mid-air, restricting the player's pause option, preventing them from selecting exit stage, meaning they will once again have to simply reset the console. Both of these glitches can be performed in the same level too, Tall Mountain. Not all of Mario 64's glitches leave you totally screwed, of course. Several other glitches have interesting effects, such as a rare occurrence when walking through the front door of Big Boo's haunt. Normally, doing so causes a high-pitched boo laugh sound effect to play, but sometimes this is played at a much lower pitch, making the normally creepy laugh just sound like a man chuckling. It's also possible for Mario to actually fall asleep whilst inside Bowser. Steady on. Basically, when Mario takes damage, he flashes. Steady on again. This demonstrates that he is invincible. However, this invincibility actually continues even after that blinking stops, so long as Mario is inside an enemy. Bowser will also continue to spin around in the same spot indefinitely so long as Mario remains inside his hitbox, meaning that Mario's idle animation is able to play whilst in this invulnerable state, while Bowser continues to spin around looking for the player. People love some light-hearted penguin murder, with it practically being a staple of Mario 64 playthroughs to throw the two baby penguins located in Cool Cool Mountain off the side of the stage so that they may fall to their inevitable demise and the cycle can be complete. However, one lesser performed action that many may not even know is feasible is abusing exploits that cause the two adult penguins to actually chuck themselves off the edge. In the game's Japanese release, the mother penguin has a programming oversight that results in her continuing to move whilst her dialog box is open. Because she walks towards Mario when he delivers the correct baby penguin to her, it's possible to cause her to walk further than ever intended. With true determination and precise angling of the penguin's movements, it's possible to cause her to step onto the ski lift located a short distance from her initial spawn point. Starting the ski lift's motion by stepping on it will be too much movement for the big bird, and she will yeet herself into the void. The other adult penguin, located on the level's sliding racetrack, has a very slim chance of taking fate into their own hands through specific inputs executed by the player. Panan Koek 2012 and friends discovered through extensive research and determination, essentially creating an algorithm that tested every possible sequence of inputs during the descent, only to find that one sequence will result in the big penguin taking a leap off of the slide without fail. While exploring Rainbow Ride, an exceptionally rare bug can really leave you fluttered. This glitch is near impossible to pull off intentionally, with most players only seeing it by chance, but it can be reliably triggered using external tools. To work, a spiny must be thrown by a Lakitu near a particular bob-omb. Then the player must defeat the Lakitu before approaching the bob-omb. An issue in the game's internal values may arise where the model for the bob-omb is swapped out with that of a butterfly. However, this doesn't mean the behavior of the enemy changes, only its visuals. Smoke emits from the butterfly when being held, and before long, the butterfly can also explode. Another fairly obscure character that the player encounters is the Headless Snowman, who only makes some very brief appearances in the game. This specific character actually had some publicity when Nintendo Power published a joke article for April Fools. Around the same time as the L is Real 2401 rumors circulated, in volume 107 of Nintendo Power, an article appeared in the April News Briefs segment called Luigi 64. In the article, it's claimed that Nintendo has received word of Luigi fans campaigning to have the character appear in his own game, with the company responding that they are working on an upcoming game called Headless Snowman 64. Intended as a game to help satisfy fans of the, quote, second bananas, featuring a wide array of both well-known and obscure Nintendo characters, such as the Wave Race 64 announcer, random audience members from Super Punch-Out, the frogs in the meadow from Diddy Kong Racing, and of course, the Headless Snowman. This would also include some non-Nintendo characters like, quote, that bald guy from Blast Corps and the Bikini Woman in Cruisin' USA. Perhaps ironically, as a obviously not real game being not actually made to satisfy fan demand for Luigi, Luigi would not be featured in the title due to a mix-up. A developer quote at the end of the article states, "Luigi, is that the name of one of the civilian women in GoldenEye 007? Because if that's who Luigi is, then she'll definitely be in the game." Let's move on to Rare's fan-favorite platforming collectathon, Banjo-Kazooie, or at the very least, some of its characters. As you may already know, before landing his title role in 1998, Banjo actually debuted as a playable character a year prior in Diddy Kong Racing. However, this big brown bear wasn't the only character from Banjo to appear in the popular kart racer, as recurring turtle NPC Tip-Top also features in the game. The name Tip-Top was originally planned to be used for the turtle character that would appear in the cancelled Rare project Dream Land of Giants, the game that became the framework for Banjo-Kazooie. The same team were working on Pro AM64, a kart racer which would later become the game we all know and love after the inclusion of Diddy Kong, and this game just happened to also feature a turtle for one of its races, and thus the Tip-Top mantle was bestowed upon them. Tip-Top was then integrated into the Banjo-Kazooie series from that point on. Of course, Banjo and Kazooie both went on to cameo in the Super Smash Bros. Series. In the Japanese version of Smash Ultimate, the Duos Down Special has a slightly more interesting name. In English, the attack is simply called Rear Egg. However, in Japan, it is referred to as Oketsu Tamago, which, translated directly into English, the move is called Arse Egg. The name was also used in the Japanese version of the original Banjo-Kazooie as well, with the name appearing on its Japanese website. While in the English version of the game and its sequel Banjo-Tooie, this particular attack doesn't have a name, rather being included as part of the egg-firing ability. Though when examining the game's data, we can see that the animation for this attack is in fact named Egg Arse. Speaking of which, let's spend a little time talking about the game's follow-up, Banjo-Tooie. This sequel title is often criticized for its significantly larger and more convoluted world. Tooie's many complex puzzles and large interconnected areas led to a lot of backtracking, especially in comparison to the relatively compact and self-contained levels and objectives of its predecessor. Steve Malpass, one of the game designers on Tighe, revealed in a YouTube comment, of all places, that the game was intentionally designed to be more of an adventure game than a platformer, taking inspiration from the hugely successful Ocarina of Time. Steve mentions that members of the team certainly knew the game had become overly complicated, but it was too late in development to make significant changes, saying, "What made sense on paper in the literal form of a map was much more difficult to navigate in-game and in-head. I'd like to say 20 plus years of hindsight have highlighted how overcomplicated and user-unfriendly Banjo-Tooie is at times, but the truth is, we knew almost immediately, before the game launched, but by then it was too late to do much about it." He went on to explain that the warp pads connecting the worlds were a very late inclusion, serving as a last-ditch attempt to help relieve some of the navigational issues. Another fun name for a move in the Japanese version of Smash Ultimate is for one of the attacks introduced in Banjo-Tooie. The Bree-Gull Bash move goes by a significantly different name in Japan. Known as Harisen-Kazooie, the name directly translates to Slapping Fan Kazooie. A Harisen is a large paper fan most often used for slapstick comedy in a manzai act, in which the straight man slaps the funny man as punishment for their stupidness or silly jokes. In fact, the paper fan that appeared in previous Smash Bros. Games was also a Harisen, and was referred to as one in the Japanese versions of the games. Another reason for the name change, other than the cultural reference, may be because Kazooie is never referred to as a Bree-Gull in any of the Japanese translations of Banjo-Kazooie games, and no reference to the species is made at all. Masahiro Sakurai even alludes to this outright in the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate moveset showcase for Banjo and Kazooie. The final area of Banjo-Tooie, Cauldron Keep, was originally planned to be another entire world with its own complete set of collectibles and challenges. Greg Malis, series head, explained on Twitter that it ended up having to be cut down significantly, mostly due to time constraints. This is why the area only features a third battle with Klungo, the Tower of Tragedy quiz, and the final fight with Gruntilda. This may also explain why the game only features 90 jiggies in total rather than the nice round 100 featured in the first game. Another pair of iconic rare titles that are worth a quick look at the very least are Conker's Bad Fur Day and Killer Instinct. Early in development for Killer Instinct 2, it was planned to have a vampire character as part of the updated roster of fighters. While this idea was scrapped before the game's final release, the stage theme for the vampire, titled Bloodlust, had already been completed. The track didn't go to waste, however, as it became the theme for Count Batula in Conker's Bad Fur Day. It would be another 2 decades before a vampire finally made their way into the Killer Instinct franchise, with the character Mira being added to the game in the 3rd season of 2016's Killer Instinct. We briefly touched on some characters featured in Diddy Kong Racing, so let's take a minute to look at a few more. Crunch, for example. This croc wasn't initially intended to be a Kremling, though it is a logical choice considering the game he appears in. Former artist at Rare, Kevin Bayliss, made mention of this in a now-defunct Facebook group created for Rare alumni. He stated that Crunch existed as a concept even before the conversion of Pro AM64 into Diddy Kong Racing. His design was originally that of just a generic crocodile character, with his creation being a way of introducing a, quote, bad guy into the racing game's roster. After the team began working on incorporating Diddy Kong into the game and changing its title over to Diddy Kong Racing, it seemed like a natural development that the generic crocodile character should be a Kremling called Crunch instead, helping to better tie the character into the Donkey Kong series lore. One side effect of this change, however, is that because Nintendo owns the rights to the Kremling species, this means the character would also be owned by the rights holder as well, even going on to retain the rights of the character after Rare was bought out by Microsoft in 2002. The other Diddy Kong Racing characters, however, besides Diddy Kong, are owned by Microsoft instead, as they are not intrinsically tied to the Donkey Kong series in any way. While Crunch has a pretty cracking name, some players didn't even get a chance to learn the names of the other bad guys of the game without reading through supplemental material. In the Japanese version of the game, none of the boss characters besides Wizpig are referred to by their given names, and instead, their displayed name is simply that of a translation of their respective species. Tricky being Triceratops, Bluey as Whale, Bubbler as Octopus, and Smokey as Dragon. Let's bookend all this rare trivia with a bit of Paper Mario. This fan favorite title has an interesting little oversight. The Japanese names for some of the game's locations were intended to harken back to earlier places seen in the Mario series, a detail which it seems was lost during the localization process for the game's English release. The team behind the translation seemed to make the decision to rename these locations entirely. In the Japanese game, Shooting Star Summit is called Falling Star Hill, which is also the Japanese name for Star Hill from Super Mario RPG, suggesting they are in fact the same place. Dry Desert is called Calamari Desert in Japan, a nod to the Mario Kart 64 track. This becomes particularly obvious when you take into account the resemblance between the K64 locomotive and the train that appeared in the Mario Kart stage, along with the fact that the music that plays while riding the train is a remix of the Mario Kart 64 theme. Shiver Mountain, and by extension the entire Shiver region, has an almost identical name to Cool Mountain from Mario 64 in Japan, which is named Cold Mountain instead. This may also help explain why all the bumpties in this chapter are referred to as penguins. One enemy from Paper Mario had a weakness that was so well hidden it took 18 years for it to be discovered. Now, this enemy may only appear very briefly in only one specific place and never appear in the game again, but the fact that it had an unknown weakness is still a fascinating secret for players to unearth. In Chapter 6, green Monty Moles appear, which Mario must battle. For some reason, these specific Monty Moles have a weakness against the Hammer Throw badge attack, resulting in the enemy taking an additional 3 damage. The Hammer Throw badge is designed for use against flying enemies or enemies on the ceiling. Typically, not enemies who are on the ground. In most cases, ground-based enemies will simply take the same damage as a standard hammer attack. This is why it took so long to uncover this weakness. Most players know that the hammer throw ability wouldn't help them against Monty Moles, but against these green ones, it actually does have an advantage. But since players simply wouldn't expect this, it was never tested, or at least wasn't documented. One secret we all still want to know relates to a blue toad, located near the Toad Town train station. When spoken to, he says, "So, I hear you're off to fight Bowser. Mario, when peace returns here, I want to tell you something, okay?" One would think that he has some secret to give the player after the final task of the game is complete, but after Mario has defeated Bowser, he can no longer explore the entirety of Toad Town, with a toad standing by the entrance to the train station who stops Mario and tells him to go meet up with Peach. By utilizing cheats or save file modifications, it's possible to get past this toad and reach the blue toad who holds a secret for us. However, when trying to speak to this toad after having beaten Bowser, the game will simply crash. This would suggest the dialogue for the toad was never written, and the game fails to read any data to display as dialogue, so the game crashes. Perhaps this toad would have given a special optional endgame mission. Perhaps we will never know the true answer. Getting somewhere you shouldn't be able to doesn't always freeze the game though. By performing some frame-perfect movements, it's possible to get to a cutscene with Tubba Blubber slightly before the game intends. A result of this is the game's visuals glitching out slightly, and a snot bubble appears to be coming from the lower regions of his back. This is because 2 cutscenes are playing simultaneously, one with Tubba laying on his back and one with him sitting upright. So we get both scenes' bubbles, with one out of context. An interesting unused item in the game's data comes in the form of the Transformation Cane, a fully working item, complete with a sprite and description. Lets you transform into a party member and use their commands. After 3 turns, Mario returns to normal. Using the Transformation Cane basically would transform Mario into a duplicate copy of one of his companions, meaning you could have 2 of the same partner character in a fight at the same time, at least temporarily. It's possible this was removed because, while interesting in concept, in execution, it isn't exactly a powerful benefit in most cases compared to just utilizing Mario's skills directly. Perhaps it was used for a plot point that got scrapped. Hopefully one day we'll know. Moving on from a game which pushed Mario's presence into a new dimension and onto a game which pushed game genres into new territory. When the team began creating Doubutsu no Mari, the Japan-exclusive first entry into the Animal Crossing franchise, director Katsuya Iguchi and Hisashi Nogami set out to create a game that was unlike any that came before. And as such, it didn't quite fit into any existing genre that was known at the time. However, because games needed to be classified by a genre on their retail packaging, the team settled on referring to the game as a communication game. A pretty good fit considering most of the game involves communicating with your town's various villages. One of the biggest features in this initial entry of the Animal Crossing series was the inclusion of NES games that could be played from within the game itself. By utilizing the game's built-in NES emulator, it's possible for any tech whiz to install additional ROMs to the N64's controller pack. While this wasn't an advertised feature of the game, doing so and then selecting the Save a Letter option whilst in the post office will present the player with a unique menu that would let them view and delete ROMs. A menu which wouldn't show up in normal gameplay and only appears if additional ROMs were added to the controller pack by the player. Because Nintendo never officially implemented any way of installing additional ROMs, this menu is never normally shown. And with the future releases of Doubutsu no Mori E+ and Animal Crossing, players wouldn't need access to this menu as they could delete ROMs from their memory card directly from the GameCube's main menu. Additionally, in Doubutsu no Mori's Chinese IQ release, this menu text is corrupted, with the title being a garbled mess and the rest of the menu remaining in its original Japanese language. From a Rare secret to a game developed by British developer Rare, Perfect Dark was rife with typical Rare quirks, such as a hidden Easter egg which, turns out, was never actually meant to appear in the game's final release. A pre-release screenshot of the game showed a Borg cube, a type of starship used by the Borg race to travel the galaxy in Star Trek: The Next Generation. It seems the cube was used as a placeholder graphic for the shield tech item in Datadyne Investigation. This same box, textured with a screen cap of the Borg cube from Next Gen and slightly tinted with tones of cyan and gold, was also used as a placeholder model for objects during the development of GoldenEye 007, which uses the same engine as Perfect Dark. It seems to me the folks over at Rare had great taste in their sci-fi show choices. Speaking of GoldenEye, did you ever play multiplayer only for your friend to pick Oddjob, sparking a 20-minute debate on whether playing as the pint-sized assassin is fair? Many GoldenEye fans see playing as Oddjob in multiplayer mode as a form of cheating, as his short stature places him below the game's auto-aim bullet radius. Well, it wasn't just fans of the game that acknowledged this, but even the developers themselves. It was addressed by lead environment artist Carl Hilton, as well as gameplay and engine programmer Mark Edmonds within an oral history article released in Mel magazine in 2018. 21 years after the game was originally released. They both stated pretty bluntly that playing as Oddjob is definitely cheating, and they were even aware of this fact while creating the game. Hilton said, "We all thought it was kind of cheating when we were playtesting with Oddjob due to his short stature, the auto-aim of the weapons goes above his head, but it was too much fun to take out, and there was no impetus from any of us to change it. It's clearly become part of the culture and folklore of the game. I noticed playing GoldenEye as Oddjob was mentioned in Ready Player One, so ultimately, I think it's fine." Edmund said that it's definitely cheating to play as Oddjob, but that can just add to the fun when you're all sitting there next to each other and berating, poking, hitting the person who chooses him. Personally, I like to pick Jaws and then beat the person with Oddjob just to show them. We could have put something in to stop this blatant cheating, but why not just let players decide on their own rules? One fun mode in the game is no doubt DK mode, which gives characters crazy proportions akin to Rare's redesign of Donkey Kong from the Country titles. This mode remains present in the game's Xbox One release, not just in behavior, but even in name. Given that Nintendo was directly involved with the project to get GoldenEye re-released on modern consoles, with the title having a simultaneous release on both Nintendo Switch Online and the Microsoft Store, this could in fact be one of the first times in which Nintendo has given an official approval for their IP to be referenced directly in a title released on a competing console. Let's jet to another Nintendo classic with Star Fox 64. Mitsuhiro Takano, the original scriptwriter of Star Fox 64, once admitted in an issue of Iwata Asks during the promotional period for Star Fox 64 3D on 3DS that the team had initially planned to include more aquatic stages based on the Blue Marine from the original game, but they were removed because of a feeling that they dragged the game's pace down too much. There's actually some references to this left in the final release, with Falco's dialogue in the Japanese version of the Aqua stage, in which he says, "This is the only time in our life we'll ever use this thing." For the record, the line was changed in the English release to, "This thing will never hold together." The Japanese line was apparently added to the game as a result of Takano feeling bad about the gameplay only featuring a single underwater stage in the single-player mode. Files pertaining to Star Fox 64, which were unearthed in the Nintendo GigaLeak, seem to suggest that one of the cut Blur Marine stages was known as Katoria, which roughly translates to Cattleya. Cattleya is a real-life genus of orchids, a fact that adds more credence to the suggestion that this stage may have been planned to be a beautiful water planet. The initials for the planet, CL, show up in many other source files too, giving a clue as to what it would have been like. Examples include Fox_eDisplay references CL_ship 0, CL_ship 1, and Fish 00, while Fox_boss.h refers to CL's boss as Saba, or mackerel. Fox_juja.o, meanwhile, refers to a Saba snake, heavily implying that the stage's boss would have been some kind of fish creature, or perhaps an eel or sea snake of some kind. Most of the other files label CL as Colony, implying that Cattleya would have been home to several underwater cities. In early beta versions of the map, CL was positioned between where Area 6 and Bolse would be, and presumably would have led into the cut-planned Venom normal route where Fox would have battled against Andross on foot with a bazooka. One thing that did wind up going into the game is the rather infamous killer bee enemies. These bees were designed by Shigeru Miyamoto himself, who wanted to include them throughout development, and after absolutely insisting on their inclusion, he was instructed by the development team to design the enemy himself. He went away and drew up 3 different designs and asked the team which one they would utilize in the game, with the final design being decided only towards the end of development. 14 years later, the game would get a 3D remake, bringing some alterations with it. One particularly famous line from Star Fox 64 comes from Falco Lombardi, when he reminds the player,
"Hey Einstein, I'm on your side!"
A somewhat controversial line, because it implies that there exists some version of the famed scientist Albert Einstein within the Star Fox universe. That said, it's worth pointing out that this line was added into the game when the Western localization was made, with the original Japanese version of Falco's line being, "Damn it, can't you even distinguish between friend and foe?" In the 3D remake, the reference to Einstein was removed, and the line was changed to, "Hey genius, I'm on your side," before winding up as the basis for Star Fox Adventures and altered to fit into the Star Fox universe. And as such, prototypes of Dinosaur Planet show us how the game changed and what was cut in the transition. Crystal, for example, was not an original character created for Star Fox, but a unique character for Dinosaur Planet. But Rare had originally considered completely removing Crystal during the conversion to Star Fox Adventures. Former Rare artist Kevin Bayliss recently showed a glimpse of an earlier form of Star Fox Adventures cutscene sequence notes, which show 0 traces of Crystal. Instead, Fox McCloud took her place in the game's prologue, riding the Cloud Runner onto General Scale's galleon, and then eventually arriving at Warlock Mountain, the location which would become Krazoa Palace in the final game. Here he would have communicated with Slippy Toad and General Pepper, with the former beaming him the projectile upgrade, filling in the spot for Randorn, who grants Crystal the projectile spell page in Dinosaur Planet. Another early idea from Rare during this transition was for Fox to crash land his R-Wing over Dinosaur Planet, forcing him to traverse on foot. The developers had multiple meetings with the staff at Nintendo in Kyoto, including Shigeru Miyamoto and Takaya Imamura, the creator of Fox McCloud and godfather to the Star Fox series. They worked to iron out their new story for what was to become Star Fox Adventures. During these meetings, Miyamoto and Imamura actually requested that Crystal remain in the game, feeling as though it would be a waste to scrap her entirely. Imamura also chose to then redesign her so that she would better fit aesthetically with the rest of the Star Fox cast. According to Imamura, the redesign that he came up with for Crystal was inspired by Vampirella, a Warren Publishing comic book character known for wearing particularly risque outfits. This was reportedly because of a desire from himself and Miyamoto to add a degree of sex appeal to the Star Fox franchise, with Miyamoto wanting the series to have more mature elements wherever possible. Another early bit of Adventures concept art that Kevin Bayliss posted featured a to-do list, with one of the bullet points stating, "We use Crystal again." It's perhaps evidence that indicates that this to-do list was written after one of these meetings between Rare and Nintendo. The original Super Smash Bros. Could only be realized, at least as we know it today, thanks to Nintendo's back catalog of iconic franchises. Smash Bros. Built upon those franchises in their games, and gave us a perspective on them that we hadn't seen before. But a few of those environments aren't as game accurate as some may have been led to believe. Contrary to popular belief, the Mushroom Kingdom stage doesn't use sprites or music from the original Super Mario Bros. This is most noticeable with the enemy sprites in the background showing far more complex shading than would have ever been possible on the original NES. Many of the sprites are discolored, and in some cases such as the ground blocks being 1 pixel too tall, and the outline of the goal stair blocks being too thick. In regards to the stage's music, while it is indeed an impressively close replica of the music from the original game, it uses subtly different instruments and a mildly slower tempo. In the stage's future appearance in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, the graphics wound up being revised and made far more accurate to the original Super Mario Bros., using graphics from Super Mario Maker and replacing the faux overworld theme from the N64 release with the actual original NES version of the song. Changes were also made between the Japanese version of Smash 64 and its international release. Not many significant changes, but Mario and Luigi were given a small height boost, while at the same time Kirby was given a small cutting down to make him shorter. These three characters alone are the only ones whose sizes differ between regional releases. The biggest difference between regions is often language and culture, and localizing a game for a new region can lead to some inelegant compromises and oversights. In many Nintendo titles, including Super Smash Bros. And Mario Party, the word hip is frequently used when naming maneuvers that relate to a character's bum, like hip attack or hip drop, rather than, say, bum slam. You'll see it in English games, but it's a quirk of Japanese. While hip can use the English meaning in Japanese, it frequently refers to the derriere. This is what's called a false friend, when a word is similar between two languages but isn't functionally the same. For example, in English, a mansion is basically a very large house, while in Japan, a mansion is more like an apartment complex. Both refer to a residence, but different kinds. As video game translator Clyde Mandelin points out, many games have hip-related terms in them, and usually these are given different names when localized, such as ground pound or smash attack. But this isn't always the case, such as Yoshi's hip drop attack in Smash Bros. Mario Party even has a mini-game called Hikomi Hip Drop, meaning pound it down hip drop. When translated, this was simply called ground pound, though this wasn't accompanied by a change in instructions, as the game's rules still utilizes the hip drop term. Donkey Kong 64 is a game we have a lot to talk about, partly because it's massive. The first thing we're yapping about comes from May 2013, where Rare programmer Chris Marlowe released a Let's Play video of Conker's Bad Fur Day, sharing a story about the development of Donkey Kong 64. Marlowe explained that Rare encountered a memory leak early in playtesting and, unable to determine the exact cause before the game's release, decided to bundle it with an expansion pack which inexplicably fixed the bug.
Story is that there was a bug that caused the game to randomly crash that only occurred in the 4 meg only version. Physically, the game just kept randomly crashing, and they couldn't find out what it was, so they had to ship with the memory card in it
for free.
For free, and it cost them a fortune to push it out.
Which is why.
And it was the only game that required it.
Of course, the story was quickly swept up by gaming news sites, but Mark Stevenson, a developer who worked on the game, denied the claim in a November 2019 interview. He explained that Rare's management had directed the team to use the expansion pack early in development to enable advanced graphical effects like dynamic lighting. He did, however, confirm the fact that DK64 contained a game-breaking bug during development, but that it only seemed to affect a single revision of the Nintendo 64 hardware, and that it was eventually resolved prior to the game's release. Stevenson speculated that Marlowe somehow conflated the two stories, resulting in the false factoid about the game's memory leak issues. That game-breaking glitch wasn't the only bug Rare should have squashed. The final game has a surprising amount of bizarre glitches. It's actually possible to unlock Chunky Kong for the player while he simultaneously remains in place on the game's overworld as an NPC. This means it's possible to have two Chunkies on screen at the same time. If the NPC version of Chunky Kong is approached by his playable counterpart, he will do nothing but stare deeply into his soul, almost as though he recognizes that one of them is a fake. But he isn't sure which is which. Donkey Kong's deck actually holds a small Rare secret relating to cloning errors too. While it's possible for the player to walk on the deck out to the front of DK's treehouse, it is usually inaccessible as access is blocked by walls and a loading zone when walking outside. Because the deck isn't usually accessible, cheats or glitches must be utilized for the player to reach it. When on the deck, there is a spot that, if touched, creates a motionless Donkey Kong in the middle of the house. The clone has no interactions or collision detection and just stays there blinking at frequent intervals, standing in place until the player reloads this room. Even if the player is in control of a Kong other than DK, it will still be DK that appears in the room. Within certain stages of DK64, like Fungi Forest, Creepy Castle, or Crystal Caves, an unnamed bat can be seen. Though the bat has no name, it continued to appear in future Donkey Kong titles like King of Swing on the Game Boy Advance, only now donning the name Flip Flap. While it may be the first time the bat was given a name in the West, Flip Flap seems to have already been used as the enemy's name way back in the Japanese localization of DK64. Sort of. The official Japanese guidebook has a bestiary and lists the bat as Furipu Furapu. As you can probably guess, in English, this translates to flip-flap. Meanwhile, the official English guide just calls them bats. Typical. Have you ever completed a game so hard that 100% just doesn't cut it anymore? How about completing a game so hard that you fall into the negative completion range? Well, with Donkey Kong 64, the highest file completion a player can achieve winds up being negative 124%. This is attained by increasing the player's completion value so much that the counter ticks over back into a negative value, a result of integer overflow. Utilizing glitches, it's possible for the player to duplicate existing golden bananas up to a total of 280, at which point the game gives up and stops counting them. Without glitches, 101% is usually the maximum possible percentage on the game's file select screen. But with the extra bananas, we'd reach 132%. However, due to integer overflow, this displays as minus 124. As you've probably gathered, Donkey Kong 64 is rife with glitches, and another can occur when the player manages to have a Kong die during the middle of a cutscene. Because the Kong dies, gameplay won't resume after the cutscene comes to an end. Instead, the camera will simply return to the body of the dead Kong and linger on it indefinitely. A reminder that this is what you see when you die, a third-person view of your own body forever. This never-ending fate isn't only experienced by the Kongs, however. After defeating Dogadon, he is seen falling off of the battle arena while he spins. It's probably a promising assumption that the boss's model is unloaded from the game when he falls out of view, but the developers never actually did this. Instead, the player can clip out of bounds and find that he remains under the lava, spinning in the abyss for the rest of eternity. More damage can be done other than death, of course. If somehow a player manages to have a Kong play an instrument while they slide off of a ledge into water, the game will struggle to process this and will lag immensely. Adding to this, rather than the enjoyment of an instrument, the player will be subjected to a harsh, corrupted audio noise for the duration of the instrument scene, after which it will return to normal and behave as though nothing happened. But it isn't all bad for the Kongs. There's another secret that would have been handy for players rather than making them regret their choices and quit the game. Donkey Kong 64 has a fairly obscure hints system, likely intended to assist players who can't seem to progress in a level. The only trouble with this hint system is activating it. The actions necessary to achieve it are convoluted to the point of absurdity and inconsistent to boot. Examples include having to pause the game repeatedly, only 1,501 times in a row to be exact, or you could just crouch for 4 hours straight. Hey, at least with the hint that it's going to give you, that would save you some time trying to work out what to do so you can actually play the game, right? Speaking of Kongs, we reported a while back that Mario Kart 64 may have a small cameo appearance from Diddy. Seen driving the bus on Toad's Turnpike, this silhouette of a monkey wearing a baseball cap was presumed to be Diddy himself. We're still pretty certain the character was intended to be Diddy, but recently it was unearthed by Western fans that the Japanese Mario Kart 64 website might suggest differently. Here, it's suggested that this shadowy figure is actually what it claims to be, a ukiki wearing a hat. An unlikely story, but hey, we can't question the official material, even if it's a little bit ridiculous. Another obscure background character can be found at the Bowser's Castle course. In one area, there's what appears to be a green thwomp sealed away in a jail cell. This thwomp's not really green though, it's just the way they're lit up. This thwomp would inspire urban legends claiming that players could free him using a convoluted series of tricks, after which he'd be playable under the name Marty. We've mentioned Marty before, but there's a few details we overlooked last time. Firstly, Marty's name originally appeared in doctored screenshots and was likely chosen so the hoaxers could reuse letters from the names Mario, Toad, and Yoshi to form the name Marty. Additionally, when this stage reappeared in the later entry Mario Kart Wii, Marty appeared differently to how he did in his previous appearance, this time being made to look the same color as the rest of the thwomps in the game, suggesting that his sickly tone was not necessarily an intentional choice, or even that it may have been an error. Castlevania Legacy of Darkness saw a change during its journey overseas, with the Japanese release allowing players to save their progress to the game cartridge itself, rather than the NTSC and PAL releases, which required a controller pack to make a save. Probably due to the Western releases needing a controller pack to save, and that you can't also plug a Rumble pack into that one slot, the Japanese game's Rumble support remained exclusive to the region. It isn't just these physical differences though, as the Japanese release also had Henry's scenario unlocked from the very moment the player turns the game on, while we in the West had to complete Cornell's scenario beforehand. At least this is what we always believed. In 2024, a hidden variation of the Konami code was discovered, which unlocks all characters and costumes from the word go. To activate this unlock, the player has to press C up 4 times, C down 4 times, then C left, C left, C right, C right, C left, C left, C right, L, R, Z. Kind of like the Konami code, if you were drunk. now it's time for Glover, the iconic and lovable glove character who may not have captured the hearts of the biggest audience in the world, but certainly did manage to at least remain in the minds of any 90s kid. So much so perhaps that in 2018, indie developer Golden Mushroom announced they were working on a new sequel to Glover, which would release on Nintendo Switch. It turns out this wasn't actually true, however, as it was quickly discovered the company had only applied for the trademark of the name Glover, not the copyright, meaning that they didn't actually own the rights to the Glover IP. Those rights are part of Pico Interactive, who purchased them from Atari SA, who bought the original company that created Glover, Hasbro Interactive, in 2001. In Glover, the player can collect Garib cards, named as such after an in-joke that floated around the development office. According to designer Rich Alban, the studio was doing a port for a Japanese company at around the time of Glover, and they got a faxed bug report, yes, a faxed bug report, which had one item that read, "There is a problem with the Garib." No one knew what a Garib was. There was no reference to it in the game or in the code, so it kind of became an office meme. Anything without a name became a Garib. Another 3D platformer on N64 is Toy Story 2: Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue by Traveller's Tales. The game has several Easter eggs scattered around, but the team initially wanted to slide a few Christian Easter eggs into the game too. Of course, of particular note was a sticker that could be seen on a suitcase which read John 3:16, a citation for a Bible verse which reads, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." Not too surprising, but when the team over at Disney noticed the reference, they insisted it was removed. In the final game, in its place, the sticker quite plainly reads, NY City. Traveller's Tales had to make do with only non-religious allusions in the end, like in Andy's room, where board game boxes have TT Games and More Tales printed across them, referencing the development team themselves. Another game with some very cool secrets is Rayman 2: The Great Escape, and this time it isn't just references. Rayman 2 contains a secret minigame for the player, though which minigame you get depends on the system you're playing on. For the Nintendo 64 and PC releases, the minigame is Menezes, a 2D space shooter where the player controls a flying letter E that must destroy the evil letters X and O and the number 8 while avoiding their projectiles. This minigame is also available in the Dreamcast release, though it was limited to being a downloadable add-on at the time of its release, and is now no longer available without hacking. To unlock this minigame on N64, players must hold C left while quickly and repeatedly pressing the A and B buttons simultaneously as the credits roll. On PC, the player has to write "shoot 'em up" during the credits and then wait for them to end. Rayman 2's PS2 version has an entirely different minigame called the Splong, which not only does my text editor want to autocorrect into something else, but it is unsurprisingly similar to Pong. The player controls a sliding blue bar on the left of the screen and has to play against a CPU player. This minigame is activated differently too, during the cutscene that plays on the Iron Mountains, in which Rayman is riding the hot air balloon by pressing the square or circle button 15 times. Now, from one Ubisoft title to another, 1999's Tonic Trouble followed the story of a janitor called Ed. Conceptualized by Rayman's creator, Michel Ancel, the game was inspired by the plot of Day of the Tentacle, as well as the world-traveling mechanics of The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. The project started pre-production in 1996 and was developed by a team of around 120 people, taking them over 3 years to finish after numerous delays. Throughout the game's long and troubled development, Tonic Trouble went under several different working titles, some less remarkable than others, including simply Ed and Head. In the end, the game went through roughly 8 different names before the final title was decided by a user poll. IGN mentioned the poll and even implied it might take place on their website, but unfortunately it seems the poll was never archived. so it's unknown what other potential titles may have been considered for the game. Another game with its own troubles was Olympic Hockey Nagano 98, released on N64 in, you guessed it, 1998. As the debut title for prolific development studio Treyarch, the game is rather simply a re-release of Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey 98, though no longer being endorsed by Gretzky and featuring the Olympic license instead. Besides the game's cover art, the in-game titles, and some very minor graphical changes like team logos or colors, every single aspect of the game remained practically unchanged from the earlier Wayne Gretzky release. Because of this, it was not exactly well received by games journalists at the time, including IGN's review, which gave the game a score of 0. That's right, a fat 0. Making it the lowest rated game ever to have been reviewed by IGN staff. The review was as concise as they come, stating, "We'll post a new review when Midway releases a new game." The Japan-exclusive N64 title Bakuretsu Muteki Bangai-O, which translates as Explosive Invincible Bangai-O, is a multi-directional shooter developed by Treasure and released in '99. The game has several unused stages within its data, but even more levels were cut than what the game data suggests. At one point in development, it was planned for Bangai-O to have a woman planet, or the idea was at least considered by the developers. The map designer on the game, Koichi Kimura, told Japan's Dreamcast magazine, "It doesn't appear in the game, but there is a Yosai, woman planet, too. But my image for it was like, everything's colored in pink for some reason, and there's some annoying melody going pra-ra-ra, pra-ra-ra-ra, always playing in the background." And well, I thought we might be getting into sexual harassment territory here if we included this, so I dropped it. Yeah, can't say we're more than that one. Mission Impossible faced a mistake from its development team too, but not with the nature of the material they wanted to include, but rather simply how powerful they believed the Nintendo 64 was as a gaming system, furthered by the fact that the team believed in their own standards and that they wouldn't compromise the quality of the game and release a substandard product, resulting in continuous delays, having initially been announced in May 1998, but then in late 1997, after acquiring Ocean, French company Infogrames put a new team in charge of the project. Infogrames' takeover of production occurred when the game was in a non-playable state and only ran at 4 frames per second, so the studio made the decision to revise the majority of the American team's earlier work and remodeled the graphics to a lower polygon count in hopes of solving the frame rate issues. Inspiration for the title was taken from Super Mario 64 and GoldenEye 007, with the developers acknowledging that they need to differentiate between the very much similar themes of GoldenEye and Mission Impossible. Ideas were scrapped because of this, with a wristwatch interface having initially been planned, but it was discarded after the team saw the same style of interface in GoldenEye. A major planned feature that wound up being dropped, and perhaps rather fortuitously, was a desire to add support for Nintendo's 64DD peripheral, which would have allowed players to access additional levels. This idea was completely dropped because the developers claimed that they did not have enough time to really think about it. A good thing too, since the 64DD was a major flop and was never even released outside of Japan. Thank you for watching. I hope you can't hear me right now because you're slumbering away, but if you are here, just know that we appreciate you, and that you should watch these other videos that are up on screen now. Just do it. Do it now. Watch one of these. If you're not asleep, watch another one.